This is AWANI Global with me, Nailah Huda. Just days after hostilities were put to a pause along their border, the fragile ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia is already under strain, with Thailand accusing Cambodia of violating the truce after overnight attacks. And the fighting, which has killed over 43 people and displaced over 300,000, was initially put to a halt after high-level talks mediated by Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim with diplomatic pressure from the United States and China. And just recently, US President Donald Trump has set 19% tariffs on Thailand and Cambodia, much lower from the initial 36%. But with core issues unresolved, just how far will the ceasefire go? And what does this crisis actually say about ASEAN and its ability to manage conflict in its own backyard? Joining us on AWANI Global to help us unpack some of these key questions, we have joining us Professor Lee Jones, Professor of Political Economy and International Relations at the Queen Mary University of London, joining us from London. And also with us today, we have Dr. Kittipos Phuttivanich, lecturer at the Faculty of Political Science, Ramkhamhaeng University, joining us now from Thailand. Thank you so much, Professor Lee and Dr. Kittipos, for joining us today on AWANI Global. I'd like to start with Kittipos. Before we dive straight into the politics and the meat of this, we of course want to consider first the humanitarian impact of this crisis with over 43 killed now and over 300,000 displaced. We know the border dispute is nothing new. It's been going on for some time now, obviously with a lot of historical roots to this. But what's different about this round of hostilities and how serious is it?
Okay, let me begin with this way. The border dispute is very common in Southeast Asia, right? But the problem is that those disputes mostly do not escalate into violent conflict. So this situation is not normal at all. Thailand also had shared the conflicting area with Malaysia, with Myanmar, and with Laos, PDR as well. But those areas didn't come into the conflict like this. So we have to dig down into the root cause of this problem. And between Thailand and Cambodia, you mentioned about the historical cause of the conflict. In the historical teaching in Thailand and Cambodia, we are taught to hate Myanmar rather than Cambodia, while Cambodian people are taught to hate Vietnam more than Thailand. So this is not normal at all. I mean, the sense of hostility this time is not normal at all. But, it is also general in Southeast Asia that the root cause of the conflict is usually based on what we have in common rather than differences. What the two nations have in common this time is the new leader who are the offspring of the old generation leader at the very same time. In Thailand, we have Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra, and in Cambodia, they have Prime Minister Hun Manet, who is the son of the previous Prime Minister Hun Sen. And what we have in common between Thailand and Cambodia this time is that those two leaders both also have something in common. That is, they are very unpopular at the beginning because of the legend of their leaders. I mean, the legend of their fathers. While Paetongtarn tried to boost her popularity by promoting entertainment complex in Good Island and by visiting a lot of foreign leaders abroad whom she considered the friend of her fathers. This in fact worsened her situation. Prime Minister Hun Manet chose to boost the strong sentiment of nationalism among Cambodian people. The first evidence is the withdrawal from CLVDTA negotiation in September 2024, which caused much tension in Cambodian-Vietnamese relations. However, because of Vietnamese strong leadership, he turned towards the other neighbor countries whose leader, I'm so sorry to say that, is weak. It began by the Cambodian army burning Tri Muk Pavilion or Ruom Chai Pavilion in Chongbuk in March this year, following by the gunfiring situation around the same area in May. And in the middle of June, the secret talk between Paetongtarn Shinawatra and her uncle Hun Sen was leaked. As the result, many Thai protesters provoked nationalism to pressure her to resign. At this point, it is worth mentioning that while Cambodian leader uses nationalism to strengthen his position, Thai people use nationalism to turn against their leader. By the way, after the landmine incident, the conflict has been escalated into the violent clash. And the sentiment of hostility between the two nations goes beyond control, both in the battlefield and in the social media and online platforms. It does go even beyond the sense of humanities.
Yeah, we will take a closer look at the ceasefire and how it's actually holding up now after a few days, and of course with the new US tariffs announced. But Professor Lee, I do want to hear just first, how significant do you think were the roles played by the US and China in mediating this, and how much of it was actually thanks to what we like to call, I guess, the ASEAN way?
Well, ASEAN has taken credit for mediating the ceasefire. But actually, I think ASEAN has been quite ineffectual in this crisis, which, after all, has been brewing since May. And ASEAN leaders seem to do nothing about it until over a dozen people were killed and the US and China were leading in. And I think pressure from them was probably more decisive in this case, particularly pressure from the United States on Thailand, threatening that there would be no progress on peace talks unless the conflict was settled. That seems to have been quite decisive in pushing Thailand to accept mediation in this case. And I think China will have put pressure on both sides as well behind the scenes, because they're both friendly nations to China. China does not want to see them at each other's throats. And since the ceasefire has been violated or shaky, the Chinese also seem to have summoned senior officials on both sides to Beijing to press them to actually implement the ceasefire as well. So I think in this case, it's the big powers that seem to be more decisive than ASEAN, I'm afraid.
We'll return to that, but just looking at the ceasefire and the developments since the past few days, Kittipos, not a week coming into the ceasefire announcement, we're seeing accusations specifically from Thailand that Cambodia has violated the truce with overnight attacks and whatnot. What do you think this says about the ceasefire and perhaps its fragility? How long do you think this can go on?
This is very hard question to be answered, but I can tell you one thing, that though the ceasefire stopped the actual fight, it doesn't cover the other way of fighting. What is happening right now is the information, psychological, and legal warfare between the two countries. In fact, in the case of Thailand accusation of Cambodia of stating the fire after the ceasefire, right? In fact, both Thailand and Cambodia are the part of Soviet Mekong, which is the cooperation framework between US NASA and the Mekong countries. I mean the lower Mekong countries. In fact, we can fly this into the NASA and use the satellite of the NASA to verify the truth, who is the one who opened fire first. Because during the information warfare, words from both sides are meaningless. To make it equivalent, recently, Miss Mali, right, the spokesperson of the Cambodian side, also accused Thailand of rejecting its vowed wounded soldier to get the medical treatment in Thailand hospital. In fact, Cambodia can make this accusation because they know Thailand very well. Normally in Thailand, the public hospitals are always crowded. Thai people have to go to the hospital to wait for the service at 3 a.m. in order to get diagnostic around noon. This is normal in Thailand. Normal for the public hospital in Thailand. And keeping in mind that during the Cambodian attack this time, approximately 8 to 10 public hospitals were destroyed by Cambodian BM-21 rocket launcher. The remaining public hospitals are becoming even more crowded. However, the private hospital in Thailand is totally another world. Even many Cambodian rulers went to Thai private hospital to get the treatment. I really have no idea why they just don't send a wounded soldier to this hospital instead, but they choose to go to the public hospital, right? So this is not just the information warfare, but it is information warfare between those who know each other very well. you know. So what we have to bear in mind is that every accusation needs a solid and well-rounded verification. This is what I can talk right now.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, and I hope that that's what we'll be able to address and try to get through all of this, as you say, the information warfare. But just on that note, Professor Lee, you were also talking briefly about this on Twitter or X, or at least that's some of the comments that you received from users on the social media with their own sort of narratives. But you did touch on some of the deep political economy roots to this crisis, and Kittipos has also talked about why this is triggered now. But Lee, what are your thoughts on this? Why is this happening now? What are probably some of the key events that led to this?
It's hard to say for sure because it's all very opaque. We don't really know why decision makers are doing what they're doing. There's a kind of handful of people that probably know the true answer to this. But as Kittipos has already said, territorial conflicts are often more about domestic politics than they are about the territory. And there's a long history to this. So back in 2008, Thai conservative elites whipped up a crisis on the border over the contested temple of Phuttivanich because they found it useful to bring down a government that they hated, which was aligned to their arch enemy, the politico-business oligarch Thaksin Shinawatra, a bit like today. This time, it seems that from open source intelligence like satellite imagery, it's really the Cambodians that have been instigating this through quite long-standing building of roads and bases near the border and so on, notwithstanding tit-for-tat escalations on the Thai side as well. So the question is, why would the Cambodians initiate this at this particular point in time? I'm not quite sure it's about Hun Manet trying to shore up his regime, because the person who's been at the front of all this is actually Hun Sen. And by being at the front of all of this, he's not supposed to be the prime minister anymore. He's just the Senate president, but he's sort of revealing what everybody really knew about the so-called transition to a new generation in Cambodia, which is that Hun Sen is still pulling the strings from behind the curtains. It does seem, though, as Kittipos has said, that it's about whipping up nationalist sentiment to help legitimate the CPP regime in Cambodia, which has been under increasing strain from 2013 onwards, when it effectively probably lost the 2013 elections and has become increasingly authoritarian ever since. Economic growth has been very sluggish since COVID, so this is an opportunity to rally the population around the flag. And I think also the longer term context is that the CPP has had a lot of external backing from the Chinese since 2000. Now, my view is that the Chinese don't want to see the Cambodians doing what they're doing. And as I said, they've put pressure on both sides to settle. But nonetheless, I think the quantity of military assistance, of economic assistance that the Chinese have provided has likely emboldened the CPP regime to take a more assertive stance against its neighbours. Kittipos mentioned its stance towards Vietnam. Could also add the construction of this canal that they're building that will route Cambodian trade away from Vietnamese ports, and the permanent stationing, it seems, of Chinese naval assets at the Ream naval base, which has alienated the Vietnamese side. And then, nonetheless, it's always dangerous to pick a fight with the Vietnamese, as they're very difficult and hard customers. So maybe it's easier to whip up a border crisis with Thailand for domestic political purposes. That's what I suspect is going on.
It's interesting you pointed out domestic politics, and if we were to look at the ceasefire, I guess we could also argue that this was a much needed confidence boost for Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim as well, who was recently just faced with demonstrations and the cost of living crisis. To what extent this was influenced by or driven by domestic politics and international politics, which does bring me to the question of the involvement of the US and China, which some analysts I've heard are trying to frame this as sort of a Thailand and US alliance versus Cambodia and China partnership. But of course, many analysts in the region are refuting this, questioning this. Kittipos, what do you think of this kind of framing of the kind of influence that the US and China power rivalry has on this border crisis? To what extent do you think it plays a role in this?
The formula have just I think as I follow the Cambodian behavior online and Thai behavior online, it seems that nowadays it's vice versa, because Cambodia is now leaning toward the US. why Thailand is leaning toward China. This is very weird. This happened after the ceasefire. I don't know what really happened inside, but I can say that as Professor Lee mentioned that it was Hun Sen who is behind this also as well, right? Uh, right after the ceasefire, Hun Sen praised President Trump a lot, and I have no idea why Hun Sen liked to do this. Mm. But by the way, I think if we go to for the old formula, that is Thailand attached to the US and the Cambodian attached to the China, right? I think it is normal for everyone to think that way because the US built a lot of military facility in Thailand, while the PLA built the Ream naval base in Cambodia as and near the location near the naval base around 40 kilometers. I don't know, China did uh, construct something
Yeah.
there. I heard some news, but you can cut this, okay? Because it is some uh,
Okay.
informal
Okay.
informal intelligence. Okay, but I would say that conflict this time is not about just the great power politics in itself. It is for Thai, it is just about the disagreement between Thailand and Cambodia on the way to solve the borderline claim. So let's see the two countries' position first, and you will understand why we consider the great power politics has to do something with these border conflict. The position of Thailand is that right after the 2010, Thailand went to the ICJ and there is the verdict in 2013, and the verdict is that the ICJ verdict is that besides the area of Temple of Bravery here, the other borderline demarcation have to be due to the bilateral negotiation between the two countries. And Thailand adhere to this principle always. But the problem is that I don't know what happened. Maybe China, as Professor Lee talked about, or maybe the raising of nationalism, as I observed from my neighboring country. Cambodia changed its policy. Cambodia want the third party, such as international organization or the great power, to get intervene in this negotiating process. It began with the submission of whatever substance to the ICJ to file a new case, which has not been replied yet. It also asked for help from China first, but now after the ceasefire negotiation, they are asking the US to increase American influence in Cambodia. As I follow the Facebook of the one of the Cambodian influencer, they even proposed to let the US to construct the military base in Cambodia right now. This is what I can say.
Just quickly, Lee, your thoughts on this. How complex is this global power alliances in the crisis?
I think it's been important, as I say, but just to be clear, I'm not saying that China is behind all of this. I think China does not want to see this kind of conflict and instability between two countries that actually are quite closely in close relations with China. I think it's Cambodia is often seen as a kind of Chinese stooge or client state. I think that's very simplistic, and Thailand is a US treaty ally, but actually it has very warm relations with China and has been sort of, if you like, tilting towards China. I think what all countries in Southeast Asia generally try to do is to be poly-aligned, to have relationships with as many different states as possible in order to create maximum room for maneuver, to extract economic benefits and so on. And Cambodia and Thailand are not unique in doing this. They've had difficulty in some ways managing their external relations and maintaining poly-alignment, right? So the Cambodians have been quite alienated from the US for some time because of this increasing authoritarianism since 2013, as I mentioned. So the US has increasingly put sanctions on the regime and cut off cooperation. So the Cambodian regime probably sees this as an opportunity to improve ties with the Americans, because instinctively that's what they want. They want close ties with China and close ties with the United States and with the UK and with the EU and with India, with everybody, in fact. That's the general strategic approach that Southeast Asian countries take. So I think to read all this as, one country's taking one side and one country's taking the other side, I think is to misunderstand how these regimes try to manage their external relations.
Just on that point about ASEAN's poly-alignment, or what they like to call, I guess, the ASEAN neutrality, what do you think, Lee, this says about ASEAN's conflict management and diplomatic centrality? How do you think they would fare in managing other disputes and conflicts? Perhaps if we were to see tensions in the South China Sea getting worse, do they have to get their things together, do you think?
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, as I said earlier, I think ASEAN was kind of asleep at the wheel when this crisis broke out. It did not really do very much. This reflects the kind of ostrich approach that ASEAN countries often take to sensitive and difficult issues. Stick your head in the sand and hope that the problem goes away. And what if it doesn't, right? Crises are apt to boil over into serious conflicts. In this case, I think it was only when the big powers got involved and put pressure on the two sides that created a space for ASEAN. And as you say, the South China Sea issue is another one of these long-standing territorial disputes where there is a real possibility at any time that frictions, particularly at the moment, frictions between the Chinese and the Philippines inside the Philippines EEZ, could boil over into active conflict. Now, there are lots of different national interests within ASEAN that divide the region. Like, some countries don't have a claim in the South China Sea, they don't really want to get involved, they don't want to annoy China. Others, they are claimants and they want ASEAN to take a strong stance, and so the region is divided. But ASEAN claims to have a central role in diplomacy, in managing regional order, and simply going through 20 years of fruitless negotiations with China on a code of conduct in the South China Sea is not enough. Right? There's a real risk that this could boil over into conflict. And so I think ASEAN needs to develop serious mechanisms of preventive diplomacy. We used to talk a lot about preventive diplomacy in the 90s and the 2000s, but really we don't hear very much from it anymore. So instruments that can deploy regardless of what the parties involved want, that can do shuttle diplomacy, that can try to do crisis management, because the risks of conflicts boiling over have increased with the increasing geopolitical tensions in the region. So ASEAN needs to make its claim to diplomatic centrality more substantive.
Now, I want to look quickly at the US tariffs and what's just been recently announced by President Trump. Kittipos, you look a lot, or you observe a lot about, the public perception, about public sentiment towards this crisis. And I guess just to understand how people are now looking at this, looking at the ceasefire, looking at the US involvement, and I guess the pressure coming from the US tariffs, with President Trump announcing the 19% levy, drastically lower from the 36% initially set. How has the reaction been like, Kittipos?
Everyone praised the process of the ceasefire. Everyone praised Anwar Ibrahim for this. Because of this ceasefire negotiation, so we can reduce the amount of the tax that Trump cast on us, right? So I think everyone cannot say that we disagree with that because we gain the benefit, right? So what I want to mention a little bit is that I do agree with Professor Lee, right? That ASEAN has to do a lot for this in order to get the what is called the conflict resolution mechanism, right? And this is the first time we have to mention that this is the first time that ASEAN did the conflict resolution. Mostly before this, since the 1967, since ASEAN establishment, what ASEAN can do is just to not escalate the standing conflict into the violent one. This is what ASEAN can do. We cannot solve the conflict. We can sweep everything under the carpet or left everything behind and we talk about other topics instead, right? This is what ASEAN can do. And my point is that This is the first time that ASEAN chairman played a very active role in regional conflict resolution. Of course, we have to praise Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim for this, for his commitment for peace. But as an academic, there are two things to be concerned for this. The first is that ASEAN has never had the rule enforcement mechanism. This time is also the first time that we can see the rule enforcement mechanism. As I heard the news that Prime Minister Anwar is trying to establish the DA team and ASEAN monitoring team to monitor the ceasefire, right? This is the positive sign for ASEAN to have the first one. But the problem is still about the ASEAN consensus. Because as a ASEAN chairman, Anwar Ibrahim can do everything as a chairman. But everyone knows that chairman has it's only 1 year terms. What about the next year? What about the years to come? Right? So we have to be very careful about this. And the second is like the point that Professor Lee made. But when talking about South China Sea, what Malaysia should do this year, I mean at the end of this year, Malaysia should address this conflict resolution and expand it into the ASEAN Regional Forum, which deal directly towards the security and dispute issue in Asia-Pacific region. Now they are talking about preventive diplomacy, which is its second step of cooperation. If in this year the ARF could address the role of Malaysian Prime Minister in conflict management as the successful case, it is very positive that ARF could make a significant progress toward the third step, which is to establish the conflict resolution mechanism. After being stagnant, as Professor Lee said, that it becomes stagnant for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
So this is all I want to say.
Yeah, I'm not sure if ASEAN has, I don't think this is the first time ASEAN has tried to resolve a conflict. I believe there have been past occurrences like the Cambodian conflict in 1978 and even just the Myanmar crisis. But to what extent it has been successful, I guess is the question. That's all the time that we have. Of course, plenty more we'd like to unpack, but that's all for today. Thank you so much once again to Kittipos and Lee for joining us today on AWANI Global, and plenty more developments, of course, to stay tuned to. But that's all on AWANI Global this week with me, Nailah Huda.